Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Pertama sekali saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih sekali lagi kepada ABIM kerana sudi mengundang saya ke muktamar ABIM. Saya sudah mengenali ABIM begitu lama, semenjak rambut saya masih hitam lagi di bangku sebagai seorang mahasiswa, dan pada waktu itu Profesor Nur Manuti, Anwar Ibrahim, Abang Azam dan sebagainya adalah guru-guru saya. Dan sampai sekarang lah saya dah 6 orang anak, yang paling tua pun dah di dalam universiti, dan rambut saya dan janggut saya pun dah semakin putih. Izinkan saya pada hari ini untuk memberikan sedikit pendapat tentang gerakan Islam di Nusantara ini, lebih-lebih lagi gerakan intelektual Islam. Saya tidak melihat ABIM sebagai satu gerakan belia yang hanya membuat aktiviti-aktiviti grassroots, tetapi saya melihat ABIM sebagai satu thought leader in the making of Islam in Southeast Asia. Dan itu adalah matlamat ABIM sebenarnya apabila ia dibangunkan oleh abang-abang dan kakak-kakak kita pada tahun 70-an hingga ke hari ini. Dan kita harus menghidupkan kembali satu warisan keintelektualan dan juga aktivisme di dalam gerakan ini. Walaupun saya boleh bertutur dalam bahasa Melayu, izinkan saya untuk bercakap dalam bahasa Inggeris. And the reason why I'm going to speak in the English language is not because as a Singaporean, we speak more English than we do of Malay, even though Malay is the national language of Singapore. But I think when we want to reach out, not only to the youth in Malaysia, but the youth in the whole of Southeast Asia, in Asia and in the world, we need to move from the language that we have commanded to the language of command. Let me repeat, we have to move from the language that we have already commanded and have command of to the language of command. And the language of command that we know today all over the world is the English language. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that someday the Arabic language will once again be the language of command. But before we go into that direction, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the future, not the past only, of scholar activism, Muslim scholar activism in Southeast Asia, of which ABIM, and I always believe that ABIM will be the leader, the commander, the forefront, the people that will bring this scholar activism to a new level, insyaAllah. I will move in 3 directions. Next slide. I will first reassess Muslim scholar activism in Southeast Asia, and in so doing, I will try to be as honest as possible. Katakanlah yang pahit walaupun benar, yang manis mendatangkan kencing manis, dan yang pahit selalunya adalah obat. So I'm going to give everybody today a taste of some very bitter medicine, because we need it in order to be better. And if we cannot take criticism, we cannot be activists. And if you don't want to take any criticism, you cannot be a scholar activist. The second thing, I'm going to bring us out of Malaysia into the world to look at global problems, because as Muslims, we do not function only in our respective communities. We are born, we are bred, we are built to serve mankind, humankind, and to change the world. We don't really have a choice, because as long as you call yourself a Muslim, as long as you call yourself a Muslim activist, you have a duty to change the world, and you have a duty, we have a duty to change the ummah. And I'm going to talk about the ummatic concerns that we need to have. And last but not least, I'm going to offer some ideas, some pathways, some things that we need to do, homework for ABIM in order for us to bring our scholar activism into a new direction. Do I sound like Anwar Ibrahim? No, okay. So let us begin first with reassessing Muslim scholar activism right now. The next slide. Now, if you look at what is happening all over the Muslim world right now, and especially in Southeast Asia, next slide, we see that there are a lot of Muslim activist organizations. The next slide, please. We know about HMI, and we have a representative of HMI here, ABIM, as one of the most prominent Islamic organization, Islamic movement organization. Muhammadiyah, whenever I ask Muhammadiyah members in Indonesia, ada 40 million. A giant as an organization, Muhammadiyah is a country of its own. The size of Muhammadiyah is almost the size of Turkey. So you can imagine, out of a population of 280 million, Muhammadiyah have 40 million, and we have 20, 30 million, and there are so many other movements. You have the regional movements such as Risyap, and I used to be part of this movement called FAMSA, hidup segan mati tak mau, tapi memang dia ada, dan banyak berjasa kepada gerakan Islam di Nusantara. Next slide. Now, if you look at what has happened with the rise of, as Anwar Ibrahim said just now, the reassertion of Islam in Southeast Asia, we see now all over Southeast Asia, all over Asia, all over the world, the rise of the implementation of the Sharia. Not the Sharia only in terms of laws in countries, and I would like to encourage all of you to read this book by my friend who is a Muslim, an Afro-American Muslim. His name is Timothy Daniels, and he talks about the everyday Sharia in Malaysia. What he means by the everyday Sharia in Malaysia is that even if the Sharia is not implemented as a state-enforced law, you can see that in Malaysia, the Sharia is somehow being lived by Malaysians. Now, if you transport back, for the young people here who have not lived long enough, if you transport back 40 years ago, you cannot imagine that so many people are wearing tudungs like you see today. And I wrote in my book, Muslim Cosmopolitanism, comparing Islam in Southeast Asia, that this tudung phenomenon is actually a very recent phenomenon. Thanks to the activism of our brothers and sisters, their sacrifices and the kind of challenges that they have faced for many, many years, the tudung now has become something that is of a popular culture. Naik saja kereta ke highway, banyak advertisement tudung. Advertisement telekung. Satu tudung 300 RM. Dah jadi mahal. Kalau dulu nak pakai tudung, ia memaparkan keislaman seseorang yang susah nak dihidupkan, sekarang tudung dah menjadi produk. So, what has happened because of Islamic activism in the past, and this is for the information of the young people here, is that Sharia, even if it's not a law, it is an everyday embodiment of the lives of Muslims in Southeast Asia. People are becoming aware of implementing at least the Sharia in their lives. And that's why we are so concerned about everything being halal. Nak makan kena halal, nak beli makanan check kita punya ingredients, and so forth and so forth. And another scholar, a friend of mine, his name is Michael Pellets, he talks about Sharia transformations. The transformation that is taking place, especially in Southeast Asia, and Malaysia is at the center of it. The change that you see in Southeast Asia is partly due to Indonesia, but Malaysia is a major mover of scholar activism in the whole of Southeast Asia, or if not in the whole of Asia. So the next slide. Now, what we see that is happening in Southeast Asia is that people are becoming more and more Islamic. We are becoming more and more conscious of Islam, and Islamic movements are growing in terms of numbers. But as we grow, as we become bigger, as Islamic movements become prominent, it has also become very, very parochial. So this is my first criticism of the movement that we have right now. That we, people who see themselves as belonging to Islamic movements, to Muslim activism, to scholarly activism, which I identify myself with, they have become steeped in personal, political, and ethnic concerns. And Anwar Ibrahim mentioned it very, very clearly just now. We are politicizing Islam. We are personalizing Islam. And we have ethnicized Islam. Islam becomes something that is Malay. Islam becomes something that is racial. And Islamic activism has become like that, right? And because of this, we have not been engaging in systemic problems of society and of things that affect mankind. We become ruled by the ideology that we created that is supposed to be dynamic. So that's the first problem, the parochialism that has developed. Next slide. The second problem that we see in many Islamic movements, and here Malaysia, Southeast Asia is not the only one that is unique, is the problem of superficiality. Kita menjadi orang yang pemikiran kita menjadi begitu cetek. We do not devote enough time and resources to conduct in-depth research on umatic issues. Every time when we need somebody to think, we will call Shahran in Triple IT. And Shahran will call somebody to do the job for us. And then the reports will be supplied to the Islamic movements. And the Islamic movements base a lot of their work on the work of others. Many years have passed since the creation of ABIM. If I were to ask ABIM right now, other than Professor Nur Manuti, other than Professor Rizwan Osman, other than the late Professor Siddiq Fadil, other than Professor Razali Nawawi, who amongst this generation of ABIM core members, of ABIM long-term members that you can see as the intellectuals of ABIM? So this is a crisis. The crisis that Muslim activism has today is that we are depending on the thinking of the past. And I'm not saying that Professor Nur Manuti is not relevant for us. But if you speak to Professor Nur Manuti, if you speak to Professor Osman Bakar, whom I always do, all of these brothers, they are hoping for a new wave of people who can think for the ummah and not think on the basis of what they have thought. Why is this happening? Because many of the brightest minds that you see in Southeast Asia is now in the West. They are now in America. And that's why all of us here who are present today, when we think about profound ideas, we think about Yasir Qadhi. When you think about profound ideas, you're thinking of Omar Sulaiman. You're thinking of Hamza Yusuf. You're thinking of Abdul Hakim Murad. Where is the Southeast Asian in the story? He or she is gone. Why? Because every time when we need someone to think for us, we depend on people who are outside. This is the poverty of Islamic activism in this part of the world. Ini dah tergaris, terguris, dan tergiris hati. But I said to you just now, I want to give all of us, including myself, the bitter pill. Then we will find the solution. And last but not least, one problem that we have, the next slide, is, as mentioned just now, dogmatism. That because the people of the past have come out with really brilliant ideas, be it Hassan al-Banna, be it all of these thinkers of the past, we are over-relying and have over-reliance on the worldviews, the tasawwur of past scholar activists, and we lack the courage, and Anwar Ibrahim mentioned this again just now, the courage to question these ideas. Can Hassan al-Banna be wrong? Yes, he can be wrong. Can Sa'ad Ramadan al-Buti be wrong? Yes, they can be wrong, because they are human beings like us. But because we have developed this dogmatism of all of these ideas, we do not dare to question these ideas. In order for us to move forward, in order for us to come out with new ways of looking at our movement. What is happening today, brothers and sisters in Islam, is that we have a decline of the ijtihadic mindset. We do not think for ourselves. So that is the problem. Next slide that you see. And I don't want to dwell on these problems for too long, because too much bitter pill will also make you very, very unwell. Now, I want to move out of the things that we have not done enough, and I'm not saying that ABIM has not done anything, but I'm saying we have not done enough to look now at what is happening around the world. Next slide. If you look at the problems of the world today, we are in the phase, as mentioned just now, of the issues of sustainable development. If you go to every Muslim country in the world today, you cannot find clean water. You cannot drink clean water from any tap in any Muslim country in the world today. Problems of population, problems of democratization, no long-term perspectives, problems of the global convergence of IT, the gap, as mentioned just now by Anwar Ibrahim, between the rich and the poor. The richest countries in the world today are Muslim countries. The poorest countries in the world today are Muslim countries. The gap is staggering. The difference between Qatar and the UAE with many of the other countries all over the world that are Muslim majority is so large. Health issues, orang Melayu kita tak payah cakap, macam-macam penyakit kerana banyak makan, sikit-sikit makan, lama-lama jadi bukit penyakit. Health, capacity to decide, peace and conflict, status of women, organized crime, energy, science and technology, and last but not least, the loss of ethics. And Muslim countries are not spared from these global problems. And the next slide, if we focus in on the Islamic countries, these are the 4 key issues that we are looking at today. The first is relative deprivation. Relative deprivation berarti orang yang terpelajar tetapi tidak dapat pekerjaan yang sesuai dengan pelajarannya. And you see this all over the world, especially in the Muslim world. Ideological dependency, we cannot think with our own feet. Institutional distrust, Muslims cannot trust their own institutions because of the problems of corruption. And more importantly, which I hope that ABIM will make it as part of their Cosmopolitan Islam agenda, is the problem of everyday inequality. Inequality, ketidaksamaan yang dapat kita lihat setiap hari. Ketidaksamaan antara orang Melayu dan bukan orang Melayu. Orang Melayu memandang orang bukan Melayu sebagai orang yang berbeza daripada mereka. Ketidaksamaan di antara orang Islam dan bukan Islam. Ketidaksamaan di antara orang kaya dan miskin. Everyday inequality is something that we need to pay attention to, and not only inequality that you see in statistics. So this is what we are seeing now in the Muslim civilization. As mentioned just now in the book by Ali Al-Alawi, it is clear, it is almost very, very sure that the Islamic civilization now is in a state of crisis. So what do we do? Where do we go? What are the things that will help us as scholar activists to move forward? So now I'm going to give the solution. Please open your ears. The first step that we need to take, and next slide, is to have within our agenda, next slide, the importance of scholarly engagement and how ideas have to be brought down to society. In a book that will be published, I just wrote a book that will be published very soon this December. I discuss 7 key intellectuals in Southeast Asia, including Professor Osman Bakar and Professor Syed Nakib Alatas, who have given us ideas on how to move the community and the Muslim forward. There are 3 things that I feel that we need to pay attention to for us to construct a new future for Muslim scholar activism. The first is, next slide, is to ensure that we imbibe respect amongst us with the people of the rest of the world. And this is the first agenda that Muslim scholar activists must have in mind, to ensure respect within us and also between us. And here, Muslim scholar activists, and especially ABEM, must discuss, must have activities that address the issue of human liberty, human freedom, human dignity. And the biggest issue that we are in the face right now all over the world is the issue of Islamophobia. So the first agenda to me that we need to look at very, very carefully for ABEM and for all Islamic movements that are out there is to address this issue of Islamophobia. Because Islamophobia breeds racism. Islamophobia breeds anti-Muslim and also anti-non-Muslim sentiments. I used to stay in the US. People who are of Sikh background, they are being attacked because many non-Muslims who are hateful think that they are Muslims because they wear turbans. And this is a big issue that is affecting us. ABEM and all other movements must address this. But related to Islamophobia, as mentioned just now, is the issue of social injustice. Islamophobia is not only the product of media sensationalism. Islamophobia is not only part of a global conspiracy against Islam. Islamophobia is also linked to the fact that many parts of Europe and other parts of the world are in the face of inequality. So we need to address the problem of the poor. Or as mentioned by Kunto Wijoyo, kita harus memperhatikan nasib al-du'afa, mereka yang di pinggiran, mereka yang diketepikan, mereka yang tidak dilihat sebagai manusia oleh manusia yang lain. So this is the first. We need to talk about what it means to be human, what it means to be in a state of liberty as human beings, and what it means then to be a Muslim in the world. So the respect. The second issue that I hope that Muslim scholar activists will look at, next slide, is the issue of responsibility. And I hope to write a book on this called The Responsible Muslim. We need to address universal problems that have implications on Muslim societies. So to go back to what I said just now, global problems are Muslim problems. Global problems are Umatic problems. We need to address these, and we need to revive how Rasulullah SAW tried to change his society. Rasulullah was not concerned, first of all, with only the Muslims. He was always concerned with the non-Muslims, because there was no Muslim when Rasulullah SAW was given revelation. He was the only first Muslim. And then his wife, and then his cousin, and then his best friend, and then his neighbor, and slowly and slowly and slowly. Untuk kita merubah masyarakat kita untuk melihat bahawa Islam adalah agama yang boleh diterima oleh sesiapa sahaja walaupun mereka tidak mahu menjadi Islam, ialah kita menunjukkan kepada mereka yang kita ini bertanggungjawab ke atas mereka. Walladzina hum li amanatihim wa ahdihim ra'un. Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyati. And this is something, this hadith and this ayat is something that Islamic movements, Muslim scholar activists must pay attention to. We are responsible for the non-Muslims. We are responsible for everyone in the world. And when we have that mindset, we will be the thought leaders, we will be the people who are foremost in this ummah. So just now, as Faisal was mentioning about being the khaira ummah, you cannot be the khaira ummah if you only think only of your ummah. You can only be the khaira ummah when you think about humankind, kuntum khaira ummatin ukhrijat linnas. Muslims only talk about the khaira ummah, they do not talk about the linnas. You are the best of ummah from the nas. The nas is the most important thing in that ayat, not only the ummah. The ummah is the product of the nas. And because the ummah is the best of ummah from the nas, the ummah must always and be always responsible for the nas. You can only be the best of the best when you are responsible for mankind. And this is our challenge now as Muslim scholar activists, to serve humankind, not to serve only Muslims. Last but not least, other than respect and responsibility, the next slide, we need to have a new revival. And this was mentioned just now by Professor Nur Manuti, the Nahda, the Sahwa. We need to revive again the thinking and the activism, the scholarship and the movement, and bring them together. We need to revive the culture of producing global-oriented books. I would like to praise ABIM for the 200 books that they have already published, the translations of many great books, the Prof that we have in Islam. I want to challenge ABIM now to translate books that are written by non-Muslims that can help us illuminate the understanding of the issues of mankind. Translate these books so that all of us can read it in the Malay language, and that's how you can change the mind of the youths. We need to have more manifestos about what we stand for, and other books that will push Islamic thought into a new direction. And this is the next challenge that I want to put forth to the seniors of ABIM, to the people who are trained in Medina, in Libya, in Syria, in all of these great universities all over the world. We need to produce new tafsir of the Quran. Because whenever we think about the revival of the ummah, everything starts with the Quran. Kita memerlukan penafsiran Al-Quran yang baru. Kita tidak boleh lagi melihat hanya kepada Hamka. Kita tidak boleh hanya melihat daripada Quraisy Shihab, Muhammad Yunus, atau tafsir Al-Maghari, tafsir Ibnu Kathir, tafsir oleh Syed Qutb. Ini pada saya adalah tafsir-tafsir yang diperlukan, tetapi tafsir yang untuk zamannya. We need it for our time. And this is my challenge to all of us here today, to produce this new tafsir, to produce these new works that will engage with the Quran and the Sunnah. And when we have this, we will push the thinking of Islamic thought, of Islamic activism into a new direction. I would like to end here by congratulating ABIM for what it has done these 51 years. If you look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was 51 years old, he had just gotten out from the year of sadness. He lost his wife, he lost his uncle. It was the lowest point of his life. And then Allah gave him a group of people from this place called Yathrib, later on known as Medina, who signed with him the first pledge of Aqabah. When we reflect over the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we realize that life doesn't start at 40. Life starts at 50. Because it is only at 50 years old, it was only at 50 years old when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given this group that have yet to be Muslim. They were not Muslim yet. They were from Medina. They were not Muslims. They were non-Muslims who said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "We want you to solve the problems of our society because we know you as someone who is good." And this is a lesson for ABIM, which is 51 years old right now. You have gone through your tahun sedih. You have gone through all the difficulties that you had to since the 1990s. in the time of reformasi, it is now time for you to open up, for you to reach out to the larger community, for us to see the Aqabah moment in the history of ABIM, for ABIM to now propel upwards to set up the Madinah here in Malaysia as a model for the Muslim Ummah as a whole. Aqulu qawli hadha wa astaghfirullahal azim li wa lakum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.